Welcome to episode 8 of the Fireside Football Chat series. This is the special edition. This is the NFL Draft Round 1 Thoughts. And I'm thrilled to have a couple of highfalutin participants joining me today. First, we have Kiev from the Odds Breakers, very involved in the NFL draft, putting out mocks, betting angles, offering a lot of opinions, traditional and non-traditional, hopefully for today. We'll see. And these are the kinds of conversations that happen actually in all NFL draft rooms. It's not a set thing. We've seen panic in the draft rooms at the last minute as well. Kiev, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thanks for inviting me. And, I'm always willing to talk some draft. And I do have some different opinions, and let's all work through them to see if we can make sense of anything.
Yeah, together it's going to be a lot of different stuff that we're going to give out. We also have Matthew Freedman from Fantasy Life, I believe, put out some tremendous content there, draft-related content and other fantasy football content. A lot of high scores and mock draft accuracy. So you're definitely going to want to pay attention to what Matthews thinks right now, even though things can change in the last 24 hours. And we're among royalty because I know you've recently been quoted in a Yahoo article about the status of the betting and the draft betting related content, which unfortunately has scaled down in the last year or two. Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's always nice to talk with you. And, it's interesting. A few days ago, it looked like the top of the board was going to be super chalky. And then really in the past 24, 48 hours, there's been movement in the market at number 5, which has had the cascading effect of changing a lot of mocks after that, in 6 through 11 or 12. So it's really interesting. I'll be curious to see what ends up crystallizing, but at least we've had some movement in mocks in the market. So that makes it more intriguing as we head into the final hours before the draft.
Yeah, I'm telling you, these odds, they're skewed -800 one way, +500, and there's going to be some shockers, and we'll see whether or not we come up with some of them when we go through pick by pick. Before we start, just a little bit of background. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to age myself right away because the first time I got interested in the draft and started writing 4 pages was in 1980. So I know some of the audience weren't even born then and stuff, but I've been covering the draft for a long time. Kiev, Matthew, how long have you been passionately involved in the draft?
I've been betting the draft as long as I can remember. I have been writing about the draft for about 7 or 8 years at the Odds Breakers, and I love it because I feel like I'm getting an NFL dose in April, and I know I remember waiting during the COVID year, and it was later May, and I was bummed because I was like, I need to start my season win totals. I need to start, getting my information together, and it's cool that we're getting it back, normally in April the last few years. And it's an exciting time because I love to see the guys just so happy. They reached their lifelong dream. It's really cool, and it's great to see that. It's a massive accomplishment, and it's fun to predict, and it's something I'm going to be involved with hopefully the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I got involved, I wouldn't say in 1980. Great draft, by the way. Anthony Munoz going number 3 overall to the Bengals. And Art Monk, also Hall of Famer in that class. I have always been obsessed with the draft for at least, well, I say always, but I kind of got into the industry starting with fantasy and starting with dynasty fantasy specifically, because in that you focus on rookies. And I was always interested in projecting rookies to the NFL. And so even before I was writing any sort of sports content, I would be doing my own mock drafts just kind of for fun, just on my own, just trying to map out how things might go. And so once I ended up getting a full-time job in the industry, I wanted to start doing some draft content professionally. And the first of that, in terms of actually covering the draft, not just projecting rookies to the NFL, was the Baker Mayfield draft, 2018, I believe. great quarterback class in that. Great quarterback class last year, not a great quarterback class this year. This year feels a little bit like 2022, and I'm sure we'll talk about the quarterbacks in a little bit, but just absolutely love the draft. For me, I like it more than the Super Bowl. Really, it's that time of the year where, as Kiev said, all of the fan bases are hopeful. All of these guys are entering the NFL with a clean slate. The future is just wide open for everybody. I just think it's a really cool process and a cool logical puzzle to go through as someone who really enjoys doing mock drafts. So my favorite time of the year. And then of course, being able to bet on it, which I started doing in 2018, most of the time that makes it all the more enjoyable. It didn't for me last year because I faded the quarterbacks last year, but usually betting on the NFL draft is a lot of fun.
I would echo those statements. I think this is better than the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is anticlimactic. It's 2 weeks after the previous game, and I'm on to thinking about other things. So I would echo that. In terms of preparation, yeah. In terms of preparation for the draft, everybody goes about it a little differently. And I think it'll be interesting to hear your perspectives on how you prepare, how you decide, somebody's going to go here or there. For me, I study the GMs a lot. I study patterns. I look at who they brought in for visits, who they brought in at the last minute. How many people at each position have they brought in? Are they bringing in first rounders versus potential third day candidates? How are they going about it? And then it's a little bit harder with new GMs, new coaches. And we always deal with that at the top of the draft board. It could skew somebody's mock draft very easily. But that's my approach. Kiev, what's your approach in terms of looking at this draft or any draft?
It's very similar. There's, good GMs, new GMs, and GMs that are maybe on their way out. And you do see some patterns there. And that new GMs are usually trying to make a splash, but yet if the smart ones are trying to be a little more careful, So that is definitely a great start to look at that aspect of it, as well as the scouts. What I get from the scouts usually is a lot of false information. I almost feel like when they're hating on a guy more, like Jahdae Barron got hated on by a lot, I almost feel like it's because they want them to get them in a decent spot. You see a lot of that in the marketplace. And what I do probably from the most, and I put the most faith in, is where these holes are in the teams, because either way they have to be filled at some point, and a gaping hole is not always just filled by the top pick in the draft. It could be filled later, but it's also filled obviously earlier in free agency, but you have that information, right? I go to Spotrac and other sites and I see who's signed for how much, who's out, who's in, go to the depth charts, see where the big holes are, where they need depth. Heck, there's some teams that actually need starters at certain positions, and we'll get to one very soon in the top 5 of this draft.
Matthew.
Similar in that I do look at some tendencies for GMs / head coaches, both specific to GMs, but then also kind of some trends. If we have a newer GM, what do we normally see newer GMs do, or new head coaches? I think there was a great trend that Cleve TA tweeted out a couple of days ago about offensive head coaches who have picks that are, I believe, in the top 10 or top 15, and how normally they do get offensive prospects with those first picks. I thought that was an interesting nugget, and that sort of dovetails with what we've seen at number 5, with the market shifting from assuming that the Jags were taking defensive line to, oh, wait a minute, they might take one of the top offensive playmakers in the draft. So a little bit of an approach on GMs and head coaches, but much more focused on roster needs. And then what I might see in mock drafts from people that I respect, and then what I might see in various big boards to get a sense of, okay, this prospect is ahead of this prospect. And if this team is addressing offensive tackle, people might read into scheme fit and all of that. I think sometimes that's really hard to do. I would just say generally, if I'm seeing in a lot of respected big boards, respected mocks. This guy go ahead of this guy at the same position. And I think that position is going to be addressed by a team. I'm just going to say they're going to take that player, whether it's maybe the best quote unquote scheme fit or not.
Yeah. Okay. One last question before we get into pick by pick. And that's kind of, I go underground for respected mocks and whatever, and we're going to see them in the next 24 hours. And I kind of see what patterns of those. I couldn't tell you at all what ESPN is thinking and so on and so forth. How do you guys deal with the information overload that's going on right now? Because I think in terms of getting our picture together and how we want to put it together, we have to block out some of the noise and we have to say, well, wait a second. I disagree with that, and I'm getting value at plus 400 or something like that. Where do you block it out, or where do you not block it out?
From a betting perspective, I block it out with the number. Because the truth is that, it's all probability. Everything's probability. Betting is probability. And when you're getting these big numbers and you're seeing these gaping holes and you see no actual confirmation, I mean, most of this is noise. There was noise yesterday and the day before about, Cleveland and the Giants are looking to possibly trade their picks. That was just noise to me. Nobody's going to want to move up necessarily for that. They're doing their due diligence. So I'm sure they're shopping around, but they're just trying to get news out there. I think this draft is a little bit anticlimactic, and these guys are that we follow for the draft are, trying to stir things up a little bit at times. And so is ESPN. I mean, it's all about clicks and money and coming in. And I think that's important. Unless a team has just gushed over somebody, I think there's a lot up in the air. And you look at the visits then, it's like, does the noise apply with at least the visit? And what did they say about the team after the visit? So there's a little bit of truth to some of the visits, but I think that you just have to disassociate all these mock drafts that don't know. I almost wish that these mock drafts would be like, I really don't know, but this is my pick, because people start copying each other too. I mean, trust me, it's like a bad rumor in high school that gets to you and you're like, what? I think you got to really try to get through that and look at numbers when it comes to sports betting.
Matthew.
I try to pay as little attention as possible to a lot of what I hear. And, if it's a respected beat reporter talking about something about the one team that he knows, then yes. Or if it's a respected draft insider like Daniel Jeremiah, I think he tends to be pretty sharp. I mean, not always with his mocks, but sometimes. But, there will be nuggets that I think Jeremiah drops or a few others will drop. If it's someone like, I'll just say like Adam Schefter, I don't put as much weight on something that he would say as a report or a conjecture versus something that Jeremiah would say, because Jeremiah is much more plugged in and then also just much more aware of the strength and weaknesses of just different prospects and how they would fit into different organizations. So I try to pay as little attention as possible to most of what I hear and then focus intently on a few trusted sources. And then also just what I see in the market and what I see in the sharp mockers who I respect. But to echo Kiev's point, there is certainly groupthink that happens in those mocks. So even if you see something, we'll say like the Panthers having Jalen Walker mocked to them in 80% of mocks, it's not as if you can say, well, this is an 80% probability to happen. You still have to like scale that back and take into account that people are informed by each other in this echo chamber. So I still have to kind of counterbalance what I see in the mocks with the uncertainty of the entire process.
So with that in mind, I think we've laid the framework for what I think is going to be some informed opinions that hopefully I think that framework is really well put so that we can go ahead and analyze what we've seen and how we've gone about. And maybe we're going to be a little bit right. I think we're going to hit a lot of good things. We'll see. Maybe we're off the wall. I don't know. I think we're going to be right on pick number 1. How about that? With Ward at quarterback to Tennessee. And we'll kind of go, trade off who wants to go first. If anybody has a particular opinion, I have a few teams that I'd want to lead off, and there are a few teams that I'd like to sit back and hear what you guys have to say. Any questions? Anything you want to say about pick number 1?
Not really.
Yeah, we're pretty much in agreement there. From my perspective, when we get to Cleveland and the New York Giants, there's 2 standout players in this draft, and one of them is going to go one way and one of them is going to go the other. If you believe what's going on, Hunter's going to Cleveland. The Giants then would go ahead and take Abdul Carter. Your thoughts on if any of this could change, if there's any kind of Sanders noise, or what makes sense as far as 2 and 3?
I'm locked into it being Travis Hunter at number 2. And I think there were probably some leaks in the building that got to the beat reporters, because in their interview with Andrew Berry, like the first 5 questions were all about Travis Hunter. I mean, like they knew. And so they were basically teeing him up to say, what they wanted to hear. And then I think that means just by default, it's Abdul Carter. I will say with Shedeur Sanders, who was the favorite to be the number 1 pick entering draft season, the fall has seemed precipitous. And I don't know if it even stops at number 21. But the fact that you have, in my opinion, 2 QB needy teams at 2 and 3 who seem all but certain to bypass Sanders at the top of the draft, that to me says a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever a GM compares somebody to Shohei Ohtani, I think that you're pretty good to expect that pick. Great call by Matt. Yeah, the beat writers were probably set up for that. And I mean, I do like Travis Hunter. I think him and Carter are the best 2 players in the draft. And it makes sense because Myles Garrett was just extended, right? So, it's just 2 things that make sense together. I kicked myself because I was liking it at minus 150 a little bit, but I was waiting it out. And on my walk, I see, Barry, the GM there, start, gushing over him. I'm like, oh, no. I go to the books and I find a minus 350 and I grab it, but it kept going up and up. It's almost unbettable at 900.
Yeah. A lot of people think the draft starts at 4, although Campbell is pretty much a heavy favorite to go to New England. My take on New England is that they're kind of in a tough spot because from Campbell on down, I rate a lot of these people pretty similar, but Campbell and offensive tackle is their number 1 need. Your thoughts, guys, on is this a slam dunk or are we missing something with New England?
I think it's probably Campbell, but I also imagine that they would be very happy to trade down if they could. But I don't think there's any team that cares enough to trade up. So I think they're just kind of stuck at taking best player available on their board. Mm-hmm. And by all reporting, it seems that's Will Campbell. They've been publicly complimentary about him and said they do view him as a left tackle. So I do think it will be Campbell, but I wouldn't say that's a slam dunk. It wouldn't surprise if they went another way, but I expect Campbell.
I think they would need, another 2nd round pick, maybe if they had a drop of certain ways, and it depends upon the distance. Everything Matt said, I agree with. I have Campbell mocked there, and I don't think it's a great year for linemen, for offensive tackles. I think it's just kind of a so-so year for him, but either way, New England's stuck. Because nobody's going to want to trade up, and they're trying to create smoke a little bit with Genty right now, and you're seeing a lot of it. But I still think they have to hold still, and it's Campbell.
Okay. So Jacksonville's at 5, and they have a whole new regime. I'm going to go last with Jacksonville. So you guys take the lead. What do you know? I mean, we know they don't bring in people for private visits because it's a Ram kind of family tree with Gladstone coming from the Rams. So what intel is out there? What do you guys think about Jacksonville?
Well, from last week that I was disagreeing with the Mason Graham before his odds really fell down, right? I had my own thoughts on what happens, and I always write what I think should happen and what I think will happen, because I disagree with a lot of, GMs just based upon needs and things like that. But if you look at the depth chart of Jacksonville, it looks a little bit strange at tight end, because the guy slated into be their starting tight end is Brenton Strange. And I'm sorry, I watched a lot of NFL. This man did not play a lot. And if you want to go down the depth chart, you're not going to hear of any of these people. So I scratch my head, because I think that why would you not grab the best tight end in the draft? Why would you not get him here? Because last year you picked 2 defensive tackles in the second round and fourth. Now that doesn't, I guess that's somewhat mutually exclusive, because if they didn't turn out, they didn't turn out. And Jacksonville did have a bad defensive line. But at the same time, are you that sure that Mason Graham is good? Are you going to pick an Ashton Genty who played in one of the worst defensive conferences in, Ron, you said it yourself, in history? I mean, you wonder what Iowa would have done there. Would Johnson look that much better? I think whoever played there, a mediocre Big Ten team, would look like, possibly Ashton Genty there on 4.42 speed. I don't believe it, and he's favored now. I would go with the tight end. It's 17-1. It's now dropped to 12-1. When I was talking with Ron, it went up to 20-1. That's what I would do, but I have no clue what the new GM's going to do.
That's fascinating stuff there. And you know what? I feel I've been one of the few people talking about Ashton Genty who's like, hey, there are some orange flags. Like, I'm not going to say that they're red, but they're not, they're definitely not green flags, and so that doesn't mean that they won't fall in love with him. And it seems that the NFL in general, especially with this being a weak overall class, isn't really all that interested, isn't all that interested in bypassing the running back position early on. It feels like they're going to be investing in running back pretty early, and that could be with Genty at number 5. But I don't think they should do that. I will agree that I don't think Mason Graham is really the answer either. Tyler Warren is interesting. He is that kind of complete inline tight end. Brenton Strange was serviceable in limited action last year, but that's a long way from him being like a starting caliber NFL tight end. So, I mean, I would say like big picture is just like kind of throw your hands in the air and like, I don't know. But I mean, Warren would definitely be an upgrade on Strange. I'm not sure if Mimbo or Kelvin Banks would be a really big upgrade on Walker Little or Anton Harrison. Like probably, but not definitely. So again, getting back to Kiev's point about this being a pretty mediocre offensive line class. I will say this kind of circles back on something said earlier. Daniel Jeremiah was one of the early ones in like national media who did say, based on what Gladstone said, wanting an impact player at number 5, et cetera, like a culture setter or something like that. It was just like, that sounds like Ashton Genty to me, Ashton Genty or Jalen Walker were the 2 guys that he highlighted, just kind of interpreting what it was that Gladstone said. So the Ashton Genty smoke at number 5 makes sense to me just in terms of how the market has developed, but I don't know if I actually agree with it. I will probably mock Genty to the Jags at number 5 just because I'm a coward, and it will be just like, it will just be one of the things where it's like, all right, I'm going to go with the consensus here and maybe look to be a little contrarian elsewhere, but I don't think it's a great organizational move.
Okay. I'm going to throw you guys a curveball. Jalen Walker has been so incredibly heavily tied to Carolina, and Carolina's past history is, let's trade from 33 to 32 so we can get a wide receiver, 1 pick earlier in the first round and give up that second, that coveted first pick in the second round. I think Carolina gets happy feet here, trades with Jacksonville, moves up to take Walker at 5. Comments?
I can see it.
Yeah.
I
Just
absolutely can see that, because, they want to, get their guy and they got to move ahead of the Jets and the Raiders. Maybe Walker's getting a lot of press right now. So it's highly possible. It's funny. You wonder how many trades are going to happen. And the number's 4.5 and a lot of prediction books. And if it's this early, that'd be interesting. But man, can Carolina afford to have happy feet with the way they've been doing things over the past few years? I don't know.
they can't, but they can't help themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I think it's a good point. And I will say, I think we see either very few trades or a lot of trades.
Yeah,
And a lot of that has to do with the evenness of this class.
absolutely.
And so maybe that will create less friction to where teams are a little more willing to part with something small. Teams are a little more willing to move down for something small, but it could also go the other way where teams are just like, the difference between the guy at number 5 and number 15 is not that large. I don't need to move up. So I will be very curious to see what this looks like. And I think it will be kind of a question of how disciplined are a lot of these general managers? Like, what is their investing discipline?
Yeah. So I'll don't usually throw out trades. I have 2 more, but they'll be at the back end of the draft more than the front, because to your point, there's really, if you're a smart GM, there's no real need to give up draft capital when people are rated so evenly at a number of different positions, unless there's a big run on a particular position. So quickly at 6, if Genty is available, yes or no, does Vegas take them?
I think so.
I had some sources tell me that they think it's not going to happen, that are somewhat close to the team. I mean, I don't agree with it, but I mean, I mocked Genty higher. I think the Raiders need to fix their offensive line first. What good is Genty if you can't block for him? My feelings in what will happen is probably different. I'm going to say I'm probably wrong based on the number, that it would go Genty, or if the Jaguars don't take Genty, it would be the Raiders according to the market. But I think that they should go offensive line and make the smart choice. And I wonder if Tom Brady has any influence here, because if you remember, his dynasties, there was not really a lot of running backs and wide receivers that made splashes. And you wonder if that's a philosophy that he believes in. I wonder. I mean, sure, he only owns 10% of the team, but he's Tom Brady. Listen to him. So they're in a situation where Pete Carroll is, he likes everything, really. I think he likes defense too. He definitely loves his running game. But is Genty going to fix it? I don't think so. But I would, if gun to the head, I would say yes, they would pick it.
It's going to be an interesting pick, because it could influence domino effect in terms of the rest of the draft.
To Kiev's point, if Genty's there, I think he's the pick. If he's not there, I think it's offensive line. Pretty strong lean to offensive line for me.
Okay. I could see that. I could see edge as well. The Jets are so heavily mocked to Membo. Membo's from Missouri. Missouri doesn't usually get a lot of clout in the first 10. So I'm going to mock tight end Warren to the Jets, primarily because they had this conversation last year and they passed on Brock Bowers for, I think, the right reasons last year, but now they may have buyer's remorse. Warren or offensive line or something different? Let you go first, Matthew. What do you think?
Those are the 2 that I have. I could see Kelvin Banks at offensive line instead of Membo. But if it's not offensive line, I do lean pretty heavily towards the tight end position, with it being Tyler Warren right there.
Kiev.
I agree that they should take a tight end. Absolutely. But I mock Membo myself because of tea leaves and all that, like same thing that you guys said. But I think the Jets need to change things. They lost Conklin, and they ignored their tight ends in the past. I think with the new coach there, I know was a D coordinator from Detroit, but he saw how important the tight ends were there back when Hutchinson and Laporta and you know, and how successful it made that team. So it makes sense to go for a tight end. I think that's what they should do.
I love teams that have dilemmas. We had that dilemma with Cincinnati with Penei Sewell, or do they go after the wide receiver? They're very happy that they went after the wide receiver, but these are almost no lose situations. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. Obviously, I've put a change in Carolina because I moved them up. But if Walker's there, I would imagine everybody's and Carolina tends to be pretty transparent. You kind of get to know what they have. Is there any sense that they would go other than Walker from either of you two?
No, I think if Walker is there, he's the pick. If he's not, I still think it's a front seven player, whether that would be Mason Graham falling down the board potentially, or maybe even Mikael Williams, just depending on if there was kind of a little bit of a run on the edge rusher position. But I think Jalen Walker's the pick there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had Graham kind of sliding in the trade. I had Graham possibly ending up then with Jacksonville by moving down. So,
awesome. Yeah, they picked up Trenton Warren and Bobby Brown, not the singer Bobby Brown, Bobby Brown LA, for their defensive tackles there in free agency. So, that's my mock. I think it's a smart play. Carolina's close to Georgia, so why not?
Why not? So New Orleans is a wild card to me. I can sit here right now and tell you I have no clue what they're going to do. So I'm going to listen to what you guys think in terms of what you think the Saints are thinking about right now.
I don't think it's quarterback. I'll just start there. I don't think it's quarterback at 9, which opens up a lot of possibilities that feel pretty evenly distributed. But I would say it's the trenches for me. And I think Tyler Warren, if he's available, he could be in play, but I think it's more offensive tackle or edge rusher. The trenches, I think, are where they would look to address pick number 9. But I do think this is a pretty wide open selection.
Any thoughts?
I had to put, to Manny's point, it is wide open. And I think that, I have to mock somebody. And it's almost like I wish I didn't. I mean, to be honest with you, where is Shedeur Sanders, the most polarizing guy, going to fall? How much truth is there to Derek Carr's shoulder issue? Is this real, Ron? Even if it wasn't real, Derek Carr is not a future quarterback, in my opinion. You can look at the colors. Yeah, the color congruency between Colorado and New Orleans. I put Shedeur Sanders there. I have zero confidence in it. But this is the point where you get in your mocks where if you spent the guy earlier, you can't use him now, right? It's like, so I have 2 quarterbacks in the first round, so I'm just going to keep Sanders there. But I just have really no good opinion on what they're going to do.
To Kiev's point, it's in previous versions, I mocked Will Johnson there because it was like, well, they need a cornerback and he could kind of fit the system. That, like, for a long time, it has just felt like the Saints are that spot where I just sort of put someone where I think they sort of fit the general draft range and it's kind of a good enough fit. What put me off of Sanders, because I did think Sanders to the Saints in one mock. What put me off of Sanders was some I don't know if I'd even say reporting, but yeah, sure. Some reporting from Daniel Jeremiah, Todd McShay, and then some of the beat reporters there who have said it's not Sanders. Like if there's a quarterback that they're interested in, it's Jackson Dart, not at 9. But so yeah, tough look for Sanders, because if it's not at number 9, then man, he's falling.
He's falling, and I think he will fall. And I agree with you. I was going to bring up the point. If Will Johnson was faster, I think this would have been the best fit. But he didn't run a 40. He's not reported to be that fast anyway. I think that was absolutely the right fit. Now, if Membu falls, maybe he falls right there. And I just don't know what to think about wide receiver McMillan. I know you guys are, going to bring him up as we try to match him to Dallas or somebody else. I mean, his over-under, for example, his slot over-under was somewhere around 16 and a half, 17 and a half, 13 and a half. There's been kind of movement there. So he's not mocked to go ninth, but I just think we're going to have some sort of wild card with New Orleans in this spot.
I would say in some recent sharp mocks, just to close the loop there on McMillan, I have seen him mocked there a couple of times.
Okay.
So it's an increasing thing. I would put it at maybe like 8 to 12% probability, but it could happen.
Yeah, it's going to be funny. It's going to be wild what happens there. Chicago's been typecast with either tight end Warren or maybe an offensive tackle to close the loop. I know they signed about 3 offensive linemen, and they needed to in free agency. Where do you guys think Chicago ends up?
As a Bears fan, I want them to draft offensive line. I'd be fine with Josh Connolly from the Oregon Ducks. I think that they did fix some things, but I just don't trust left tackle Braxton Jones all that much. You got to love what they did with the interior there, because they got Thuney and they just really paid a lot of money for that, and that's really needed to. I think that they already have Kmet. So it's like, do they go tight end? Because a lot of people are going Warren, which I think they might. They could. But I just want, because I have to slot Ashton Genty somewhere, I put Ashton Genty there because I think that they're going to, that's kind of like their only really other thing to do is take care of the running back. Swift is gone. And, they let a couple guys walk last year, if you remember. And they do need a player. And you think about Gibbs and what he did with Brian Johnson. That was a very successful offense over at Detroit, and so maybe they mimic that and get Genty. But I will also say, if it's not Genty because he goes earlier, I don't think they go with Omarion Hampton. I think they try to trade down, and I also think that they would go a different player, maybe offensive.
I agree fully with what Kiev just said there. Genty could be a guy that the Bears trade up for. I don't think that'd be a great organizational move, but you could imagine it happening. And then, Warren, you could definitely see them doing that. Kelvin Banks, I think, shout out Dan, who just mentioned Banks alive as well with the Bears at number 10. Banks, I think, could be a really intriguing option because he's a left tackle, multiple seasons. I think a pretty strong player, still young and developing. And I agree, left tackle now seems like the weakness on that Bears offensive line. Great job this offseason in overhauling that the offensive line and the interior with the additions of Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman at center. So those were really sharp moves, and you could see them continuing that with adding one more guy here. So I think it's offense, whether it's running back, with the trade up probably is the only way that they would get Genty at this point, or Warren or offensive line. But I could also see something like Mikael Williams on the other side. It just I could see them doing something in the trenches defensively, but I don't think that makes as much sense. I think it's more, if they go trenches, it's offensive tackle, and Banks looks like the guy who would make the most sense there.
As we were talking off stage, this is one of those cases where we wish that there was a prop. Will the Bears go offense or defense with this pick? And then we take our chances on offense, but we don't have those options this year. They're cutting back a little bit. I think they're heavily interested in Genty. So the talk that they could trade up, as Dan also mentioned too, possibly trading up to 5, he said. Bears have a couple of 2s, I believe. The Bears are, some of these teams, especially the ones that tend to continually draft at the top, like New Orleans, Atlanta, Chicago, they can't get in the playoffs. They get trigger happy. And so they sacrifice draft capital because they fall in love with a player. Now, it's possible with the new coaching staff there, they can make it work with Genty and the 3 offensive linemen that they already have. But in general, it's probably not a good practice. So the Bears could be intriguing too, because we don't know what will be left for them if they stay at number 10. At 11, we have San Francisco, and they don't like to draft this close to top of the order. I mean, they had Trey Lance that one time when they maneuvered around and ended up at 3. Unfortunately, that didn't work for them. But now they're at 11. They lost a lot of pieces in free agency. So, guys, Kiev, Matthew, where do you think San Francisco looks first?
I think trenches. Go ahead, Kiev.
Oh, this is one that they can pick anybody, Matt. I feel that they've lost. So, I mean, can you believe the guys? Charvarius Ward, cornerback. Javon Hargrave. They lost to the one of the guys that was run stopper there. They lost the left tackle, Hafunga, who was injured, but he was a safety there. Dre Greenlaw, who came back last year after a long injury. Leonard Floyd was kind of the fill-in guy that they lost to Atlanta. I mean, there's so many positions that they can go, but just because they lost Charvarius Ward, if they can't trade down, I had to mock Will Campbell there, and I know he does have the 40-yard dash issue because he's refusing to run it. People project him at like a 4.59. But I believe that, just his tape being on Michigan and his size that, people like in cornerbacks these days would still keep him in the top 15. But it would not surprise me if they go trenches as well, Matt.
Yeah. I have mocked Will Johnson to the 49ers previously, and I got some feedback from 49ers fans. I feel like 49ers fans tend to be pretty plugged in to their team in general, or at least the ones who are responding to me on social media over the years have been. And so some of them were like, no, it's not going to be cornerback. That like they have much bigger needs in the trenches. And McShay even has like pretty adamantly, when someone mentioned Will Johnson to him, he just said, no, it's not going to be Will Johnson. And I don't want to say that's enough for me, but I have this as like the Mason Graham fall spot right now in my sort of like napkin mock, with arrows pointing and like crossing stuff out. I think there's a decent chance that Mason Graham falls down the board if the Jags don't take him at 5. And I think this could be the landing spot for him. He should go, I believe, in the first half of the draft. But maybe in terms of just like athleticism, he doesn't warrant top 10 selection. But in terms of, like ball skills and production, I think he would warrant being selected at number 11. And the 49ers, as Kiev said, they have needs all over the roster. They really could go anywhere, but it feels like defensive line especially has been decimated over the past 2 seasons. So this could be the beginning of them retooling in the trenches.
Yeah, I think based on past history, San Francisco tends to build from the inside on out. So defensive line would be my first. Personally, if I were the GM, I'd like to look at cornerback, but I think they're going to look defensive line. I think Banks is a look for them too on the offensive line.
Yes.
But they're going to have some choices, and regardless of who they pick, it should be a starter for next year because of all their free agency losses. Dallas, is it wide receiver or something else?
Real quick, I want to say that Banks is my second favorite offensive lineman in the draft. And had I not mocked him to the Raiders because of, I think that, they could do that instead of Genty. He's amazing. And I would love it for any of these teams to pick him. So I have Golden to the Cowboys. That can just be switched with T-Mac. I think I got plus money on, Golden's the first wide receiver. I don't know. I mean, he played for Texas and they like speed over there too. They just lost Cooks. So I feel like that kind of fills that position in. CeeDee Lamb, is McMillan, T-Mac more of a compliment to him, or is he kind of the same guy-ish? I don't know. I'll ask you, Ron, what do you think about that? I have receiver and Golden in my mock, but what would Dallas rather do here?
I flip-flopped a little bit, and maybe we'll defer to Matthew because he's got the cowboy hat on, I believe, there. But I think at first I had McMillan, but I didn't like the fit as much as Golden. So am I off base, Matthew?
I don't think you are, and I will be very free in acknowledging a potential flaw in my process. I'm sure there are many, but one of them is maybe paying too much attention to big boards, or giving too much weight to big boards and to what I see in sharp mocks. And it's McMillan who generally goes ahead of Golden by, like I'd say like a 70-30 ratio in recent sharp mocks. But that kind of ignores the team specific fit. And I just know that I personally, in the past, when I've done mocks and tried to match teams to players in the betting market, when I've gone kind of too far into, oh, well, I'm going to go with this specific player versus the one who's higher rated and could be available at that pick, I generally believe I've made mistakes by just kind of trying to get maybe too cute. And so I think McMillan is the higher rated player in the sharp mocks, in the board, on the big boards that are, a consensus that you can aggregate in the market. McMillan is expected to go before Golden. I'm kind of projecting the first wide receiver to go off the board here. So just kind of by default, I'm going with McMillan, but I don't disagree with the perspective that Golden actually might be the better scheme fit for this team. And from other bettors I've talked with, some of whom might have people in the organization who talk to them, they think it's Golden over McMillan as well. So I'm conflicted on this, but I do think it's wide receiver.
If it's not wide receiver, I think because this is an organization, sorry to say this, Matthew, where if there's a leak, they put in a little duct tape, and then another thing leaks and they put in another duct tape thing. So offensive line would be my second look.
Yeah.
I believe in person team fit. So Golden goes here. I like the fit. But otherwise, I actually have Golden as my number 3 receiver, depending on where Ibuka ends up. And I have no idea where Ibuka ends up because he's kind of back end of the first round, and we may or may not cover him down the road. Miami is interesting to me because I tried to look at how they performed last year and got to this year. And what I saw surprisingly was they're not a bad team at all. They just need a few things to go right, and they're right there. Statistically, they're kind of right there. They could use some help in the secondary, in my opinion. Where do you have Miami focusing their attention?
I was previously leaning towards offensive line with the retirement of left tackle Teron Armstead. But now with the news of Jalen Ramsey, almost certainly one way or another not being on the Dolphins moving forward, this has become the, Will Johnson, I'll just slot him in here.
Yeah, I understand.
It's kind of lazy analysis, but it's like, I have to put him somewhere. This generally fits the draft range. They seem to have a need at cornerback. I'm just going to put him there and move on.
Yeah. I think offensive and defensive line is somewhat of a need here for Miami. Calais Campbell was more of like kind of this older fill-in, but he's gone. They did have some injuries, really bad injury luck on their edge rushers over the past few years. I mocked Mason Graham there just because I needed to fill it, but it was lazy as well. I mean, it's like he's a top 15 player for sure. Mason Graham is. So I was conflicted with Miami. Would not shock me if it's Campbell, like you said. And there's another team, Maddie, in the Green Bay Packers that we're going to get to that have the same trade issue. That's going to be happening. So I could see myself switching this up here to a cornerback or a offensive line as well.
Too early for the safeties, but I would have tried to mock them here. And to your point about trying to find a place for defensive lineman Graham, I had trouble finding a place for some of the certain round 1 defensive tackles. And maybe that's something we'll touch upon as we go through. A lot of people that follow the shows that I do are Indianapolis Colt fans. So they're going to be really curious as to where you guys feel Indianapolis goes. They lost a couple of offensive linemen in the offseason. For me, Warren's floor is 14. I mean, he has to go by Indy. But Loveland, for me, who gets getting a lot of steam, his ceiling might be 14. This is a place where it's, for me, tight end or offensive tackle. What are your thoughts or particular people that you kind of like in this spot?
I have Loveland, and because of the need, I just think that Warren was going to be off the board. Now, if I had to redo it, it'd be tough. I think that Loveland is tall and a fantastic pass catcher. I think Warren's a little bit more strong. But it's a year where the Colts could use another pass rusher too, though. That is, if you want to think about a sleeper situation, I kind of thought that maybe they go with a Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M or somebody like that. As the Colts lost Deo Odenigbo to the Bears, they could kind of fill that slot. And so, even though I have a tight end, I think it could be. I put Loveland, but I'm curious to see what Matt has to say.
Yeah, I agree fully with that. I think this is Warren's floor. I think this is Loveland's primary entry point. Tight end seems like a massive priority. They've tried to address the position with mid-round picks in previous drafts, and they've done that unsatisfactorily. I think this is a really prime spot, especially in a subpar draft where you have two really good tight end options at the top of the board. This feels like a prime opportunity to address that position in hopefully a fairly final way. But if it's not tight end, I do think offensive tackle is a possibility, edge is a possibility, and then secondary. It feels like this could maybe be the first spot where we see one of the safeties come off of the board if everything falls just wrong for the Colts. But I still lean very heavily to tight end.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Loveland with Indy, although I think it's a massive need, and I think it's going to be offensive line or Loveland. But I'm going to throw a name at you, and you can, it's not necessarily for Indy, but your impressions of Ohio State offensive tackle Simmons. Do you think, I mean, the floor, the ceiling, I know he's coming off injury. Do you think Simmons would be a possibility in the top 15 of the draft?
No, that feels super aggressive because I think there are a few concerns. So one is the injury, availability. He won't be ready right away. And then will he return to form? Another concern would be, is he actually a left tackle? Maybe he has to play guard in the NFL. And then another concern would just be the small sample. He was dominant in the games that we saw, but he really didn't play all that many games this past year. So it's a smaller sample of dominance. Okay. So you put all that together, and maybe the Cardinals at 16 would be the absolute ceiling for him. But even that feels super aggressive. And I think later in the draft is more realistic.
Okay. That's fair. I'm a big fan of comedy. Sometimes comedy morphs into tragedy, and sometimes they all happen when you talk about the Atlanta Falcons. I have mocked 22 edge rushers to the Falcons in the last 10 years, and the Falcons, apparently, because it's Georgia state law, you're not allowed to draft an edge rusher in the first round. Is this the year we get an edge rusher out of Atlanta?
I'm going to try it. I don't know if I'm right, but they do blow a lot of picks, in my opinion. It's funny. It's who's it going to be? They pick up Leonard Floyd for the Leo, and the weak side linebacker edge rusher type situation. In this kind of defense, it's a 3-4. I feel like maybe the left defensive end or maybe like a Shamar Stewart could play that position, based on his weight and size. I also think, do they get Pierce instead and throw him at the linebacker? I think they try to get to the quarterback a little bit in the trenches. So I just felt like Shamar Stewart could be the guy, but I could be way off here. So we'll see.
I think this is 100% defense. In the mock that I'm working on right now, I have Shamar Stewart going to the Falcons here. If it's not him, I could see maybe Mike Green. just kind of depending on flavor. Like, would you rather have the guy who is super productive, but didn't play in a good conference, or the guy who has great athleticism and almost no production? But I think defense is very much where they're going. It feels like it has to be edge, although I've said that previously, like Ron, and it hasn't worked out. But yeah, Shamar Stewart to echo Kiev. That's what I have slotted right here.
I'm just going to give up on Atlanta for good if they can't get this one right. We didn't talk completely about Mikhail Williams, but this would probably be his floor, right?
Yes.
At 15. So we think that that's possible. Well, okay, we're in agreement with Edge. All we have to do is talk to Atlanta and see if they're going to listen to us. I think we have wise decisions there. My intel on Arizona is they are so incredibly heavily invested in visits with the defensive line. And so therefore I'm invested that they're going to be taking a defensive lineman. I don't see it personally any other way. I don't know whether it's going to be defensive tackle, because I think there's going to be some very strong options available at defensive tackle, or it's going to be edge. What are your thoughts on Arizona?
I agree. This is, for me, the Mike Green spot, but Walter Nolan has started to move up the board.
Yeah.
This could potentially be a Walter Nolan spot if they feel like the talent is too strong and outweighs some of the concerns. But yes, I think one way or another, it's defensive line. I lean towards Mike Green right now, but Walter Nolan is kind of like a name I'm circling as someone I might slot in here instead.
So I have a very strong connection with the Arizona Cardinals team here, as I know somebody that's pretty high up in the organization, but he doesn't know who they're going to pick. So trying to get it. I'm doing everything I can. Maybe by the day, I might get a wonderful text, and I'm kind of hoping for it. But at the same time, they do need a few things on defense. They need a cornerback as well. So I did slot Jahdae Barron there. I know he's been dropping on some boards, but he did. The news on him was that he's just a slot corner, but I was confused by that because he didn't just play slot. He just went up against the best receiver, I felt like, at Texas, and he's got 4.39 speed and NFL size and great instincts. So I mean, Patrick Peterson, I know he wasn't with the Cardinals at the end, but he did retire just a few weeks ago, and I just feel like the Cardinals could use a top corner as well. So I slotted Jahdae Barron, but if I get any more information, I'll let you guys know.
To Kiev's point, I have thought of this as a potential Will Johnson landing spot if he slides further down the board, because yes, corner is also a concern.
Yeah, if there's draft droppers, that changes a lot of the dynamics. I really feel this is defensive line, even though I agree that there's some value in Barron. I have Barron pretty heavily weighted. And in fact, I was going to bring him up as a possibility for our next pick, and that was Cincinnati, who normally I have pretty good intel on, but I don't really feel like I have good intel this year because that whole Trey Hendrickson thing, talking about trades, I think there's about 3 people who could be traded on draft day. You mentioned Ramsey. It could be Trey Hendrickson. There could be a couple of others that are actually traded for draft picks. And then if Hendrickson is traded, then I think since he goes edge, they could also use an offensive lineman to protect Joe Burrow. But if I were Cincinnati personally, Joe Burrow seems to be able to operate no matter who's blocking in front of him. Let's get that defense fixed.
Yeah, the Bengals have put so much monetary capital in their offense that it feels like they have to put draft capital, premium draft capital, in the other side of the ball in this process. And I think it's defensive line. I lean a little bit more towards defensive tackle versus defensive edge. I think however I end up stacking them, whether it's Derek Harmon or Walter Nolan, I think this would be a spot. And I've heard specifically Harmon linked to the Bengals from people who are a little more kind of tied in with the Bengals, or just, I'd say, like, super focused on that team. And so I lean that direction, but I could certainly see edge here as well. But defensive line is heavily where I would lean.
Yeah. Yes. So we go on to Seattle, and this is a tough one for me because I think they could shore up the interior of the offensive line, and that brings up perhaps Booker as an offensive guard. But they could also get a draft dropping wide receiver. What if McMillan fell to them, or what if Golden fell to them? And they could also go edge rusher. There's a number of different directions. So, in terms of you guys and your research, you have any good intel here? Because this is not an organization that I feel I'm going to nail with this particular pick, number 18, I believe.
I went with offensive lineman Josh Connerly with Seattle. He's he Seattle's offensive line ranked 31st on Pro Football Focus, and Connerly can play right tackle, but I think he can move around. I think that's kind of where they should take him. Now, I said I did want the Bears to take him, but since I didn't have them taking him, I think he's going to be out there. And they got a new quarterback there, so they're going to try to give him a chance. So it makes sense to me. They went heavy defense over the last few years with Witherspoon and the guy from Texas. Name just left my head, but I think that it could be a Josh Connerly. And I'll tell you a sleeper that I think is gaining some momentum is Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. It wouldn't surprise me if he falls into the first round, even though he's like a guard, inside type offensive lineman. It would shock me if he got picked somewhere around here or later. But I'll stay with Josh Connerly.
I agree. I have Gray Zabel as the guy going here. He feels like the Graham Barton of this class, and that he has functionality all across the offensive line. I think that would come in handy, and I think he's a strong player anyway, and this fits the draft range. So I will go offensive line, but I can definitely see wide receiver. Side note, I need to go open my door for someone. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. I will say Zabel is an interesting player because he's so versatile. So I think that's a very good pick for a number of teams in this area. And Seattle makes sense as perhaps a ceiling for Zabel, but that's a very good look in terms of that.
Yeah, Zabel it comes from a Division II, but his measurables are really good. And so, the fact that he moved all over the place is great, and his size is NFL, so I don't mind him either.
Barton's range last year from Duke was between 20 and 26, and he ended up going 26, at least my range. And he has that same versatility. So what Matthew said there was an excellent comparison in terms of what we're dealing with. We're going with Tampa now, and Tampa, was, to me, it was always going to be linebacker Campbell as a succession plan for Levante David, but we've had some injury news on Campbell. I've seen some pushback now that the injury isn't that bad. He's going to be ready for training camp. So there's not many linebackers in this draft. So if you want one, you're only going to get one in the first round, unless you characterize Walker as a linebacker. It's really only Campbell as far as the inside linebacker spot. So as Matthew gets hooked back up here, is there still legs to having Tampa and linebacker Campbell kind of the fit, Kiev?
There is legs to it for sure, and I've seen some mocks with Campbell going there. Now I have Campbell going to the Bengals 2 picks before this, just because the Bengals are also in need of a linebacker. But I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I also think the favors defensive tackle with them. So I think I wrote that the Bucs can go in a couple different directions: edge rusher, offensive line, and linebacker. And I also think safety, and maybe this is where Nick Emanwari from South Carolina lands. I know safeties aren't really touted in the first round too often. Funny enough, I think this is a strong top-heavy safety draft with a couple guys, and I think this is just unique to the safety. This guy runs a 4.38 40. He's 6'3", 83 tackles, 2 passes broken up, 4 interceptions. 2 of them were returned for a touchdown, according to my notes. They are not going to resign a declining Jordan Whitehead in Tampa. I don't believe they will anyway. And so I think that's going to be a great team up with Antoine Winfield with Emin O'Rourke's there. So that's where I put it, but it wouldn't shock me if they went another direction, of course.
I could see them going safety. But the Jahad Campbell pick just feels so natural. And it's one of those Dolphins, Will Johnson, like I've got to put him somewhere. And it feels like this is the logical landing spot that just allows me to move on with my draft and puts him in the right general draft range.
So speaking of logical direction, there's been a lot of buzz for Hampton at Denver, and I'm personally not buying it. I have a feeling Peyton's going to go day 2 running back because there's so many to choose from. Even though I like Hampton as a first round, I'm torn because I like Hampton as a first round talent, but I think Denver can get more value in this position by going edge rusher, and there's still going to be 2 or 3 available. What are your thoughts in terms of Denver? Is it smoke screen for running back, or is it somewhere else?
I don't know when Sean Payton has ever done anything when thinking about value. I feel like Sean Payton is just like, I see a guy, I like him, I'm grabbing him. And I agree with you that Hampton, I do think, is a first round running back. Just kind of historically, like I don't think really any running back should go in the first round. That's a different thing. But just in terms of how the NFL evaluates these guys, Hampton looks like a first round running back. And this is the general spot where I think it would make sense. And I have heard that they do like him, but also Travion Henderson, I think, is also a really natural fit for that offense as well. I don't think he goes as high as number 20, although some people have mocked him that high. But to your point, Ron, the fact that they can get running backs of quality on day 2 would be the reason why they could address another position here, such as wide receiver, even perhaps tight end if Loveland falls this far. But I do think running back is like the very chalky pick that kind of makes sense.
I don't think they go running back. I've heard it a lot of times, but I think, as you said, Maddie, Sean Payton just gets who he likes, and it's hard to predict sometimes. But when I look at need, after Cortland Sutton and Mint, there is nobody. I mean, I think Deshaun Vele or something. I don't even know if I said his name. Is the 3rd wide receiver there? A.T. Perry, Troy Franklin, Trent Sherfield. I think that more importantly, you need to get one of the 2 receivers, and I have T-Mac, Tatario McMillan there.
Okay.
And it just makes so much sense because, this is a bad receiver group, and the 2 guys are, one of them still available. That's kind of where I think he should go. Now, will it happen? I don't know. But, Jaleel McLaughlin, I thought, was pretty good last year. And they did pick Audric Estime from Notre Dame last year. So it's like, are you going to go running back again? And it's to your point, Matthew, why would you do that when you can get a Judkins in the second round?
I agree. And I will say, to your point, it feels like if Emeka Egbuka gets in the first round, this could be one of the spots because he's a strong slot receiver, and where they are weakest in their 3 wide set is in the slot. So I don't think Egbuka gets in round 1. I think it's close to a coin flip. But if he does, this I think is the natural ceiling landing spot for him.
Yes, absolutely.
I think Ibuka has first round talent, but you're right. It's hard to find a landing spot for him. I have a feeling trigger happy Sean Payton if he wants to go the committee approach at running back, then Henderson makes a lot of sense for them because he's teamed with Estienne. however
Estime.
you pronounce his name, where you have the power and then you have the speed that way. And then they trade back up for Henderson and maybe he's a 31, 32. I just have a feeling they're not going running back, but we'll see. Pittsburgh, 21, Sanders. I can't find anybody else. This is the first year in the last decade. Pittsburgh's so transparent. I usually know what they're doing. And if it's not Sanders, I have no idea.
I have Sanders here in my mock. Increasingly, I think I'm not going to include Sanders. And I think I might just have him falling out of the first round altogether. But right now, I have him going to Steelers. If it's not a quarterback here, I think it's defensive tackle. And that feels like Harmon or maybe Kenneth Grant. But
Okay.
defensive tackle is where I go if no quarterback.
I love that.
I agree. I mock pick Kenneth Grant as well, Matt. So I think that's a great spot for him. I'm reading the tea leaves. It's that what they're looking for in more depth. I think that they had some bad injury luck on the offensive line. I think a Tyler Booker would be great there. I think that would be awesome if they did that. That's kind of like the thing I think they maybe should do. But I'm cool with the Kenneth Grant. And the whole quarterback thing is weird. Mason Rudolph coming back. It's like, hey, Mason, come back to play backup again. Are they going to make it that obvious? I don't know. And maybe Mason Rudolph knows that he's going to play backup again for his old team that he played backup for forever. I think he was a end of first round draft pick back in 16 or something. Maybe it was second round, but he was pretty highly picked, I remember. But the whole thing about Jackson Dart, I don't think he's an NFL quarterback more than Kenny Pickett really was as a prospect. He was in a pass happy offense with Lane Kiffin, and those quarterback stats are off the charts. If that's the case, why don't you get the Syracuse guy? Grab him the cord, because he threw it for the most yards and his numbers were actually really good. So it's like, grab a quarterback later, grab Kenneth Grant.
Okay. I will say quickly about Sanders. And I really like your guys' thoughts on this. Like, the slide has been so precipitous with him that it feels like Pittsburgh, they might not even be interested. And specifically, it might have to do with Aaron Rodgers. Like, I think it's intriguing that he hasn't signed yet. And I think part of it is he is waiting to see what they do in the first round. And if they take a quarterback in the first round, I think he might just retire. Like, he might not want to have to deal with this situation of once again being on a team, even if he knows he's planning to retire in a year or two, but being on a team where they're not giving him a player, whether it's on the offensive side of the ball or a defensive player who can contribute right away. I think he is maybe low key sort of like holding them hostage and waiting to see what they do with that first round pick before he signs his contract. And if it's a quarterback, he might be out. And I don't know if that's enough to make them not take a quarterback, but I think they might not really be interested in quarterback in round one anyway. But all of this is kind of impacting, I think, how I think about Sanders and ultimately where he might go.
I think you summarized this perfectly. I think you get one or the other. And Rodgers, now I kind of understand why he's waiting. If Sanders goes before 21, then Rodgers is probably a Pittsburgh Steeler. If Sanders goes at 21, Rodgers is going to wait perhaps for some sort of injury situation, and then maybe he'll unretire even if he does retire. But yeah, he wants to be the big deal at a particular place. I kind of understand it. It might be in Pittsburgh's hands to determine, okay, how much do we want Rodgers and the quick fix versus how much do we really like Sanders? So It's going to be interesting from that standpoint. I have to put in Kiev.
Yeah,
we lost you for a second there.
I just wanted to quick say, just because of that, why would you pick up Rodgers? What are you doing? This guy has.
We want drama. NFL wants drama. I don't know.
This guy there's something wrong there, man. He is just all about it himself. This is and you can think of maybe he's just leading them on. It's just gross. I run away, dude. Do not pick up Rodgers. That'd be horrible.
10 or more so picks left in the draft. Thanks for everybody for staying with us. And if you're watching this after the fact and you want to leave comments, I will make comments. I will respond to anything that shows up afterwards. This is Loveland's floor, I think. Somewhere there's a Michigan guy with Harbaugh. Is it Grant, who you've mentioned? Is it Loveland? Is it a different offensive guard? Are there any other options for the Chargers?
Will Johnson could fall. I mean,
yeah.
it just
There's
depends,
another Michigan man.
But yeah, I think this is defensive tackle. If Loveland's there, I think Loveland's the pick. I'm assuming Loveland isn't there. I have them going with defensive tackle right now. And right now I'm thinking Kenneth Grant, but it could be Harmon. It could be Nolan, just depending on how the board falls. I know that earlier in the process, some people thought maybe wide receiver. I don't think they really need wide receiver the way that they need some other positions. Yeah. So, I could theoretically see Emeka Egbuka, Golden potentially, but I really think it's defensive tackle or Loveland.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think it's defensive tackle. And I think I put Collins there from Texas. I have to redo it because I had to refresh my screen. But I think they go defensive tackle, and that's just like the Harbaugh types of thing to do. It's to build up the trenches, and who cares if he got an offensive lineman last year? He's going to go defensive line this year. And I do have Alfred Collins from Texas, and that's what they need to do. They were able to handle the easy teams just on great coaching, but when they went up against the good teams, they needed more trench depth. And I think I'm fine with any one of those, Matthew Message or Alfred Collins.
Okay. So Green Bay, my personal mantra with Green Bay is watch the steam. When you see guys like Safety Savage, that was all of a sudden he was supposed to go 43rd, then 29th, then whatever. Green Bay tends to, I don't know what it is, but things get leaked with Green Bay, and they haven't so far. But I'm looking at a cornerback here, either Hairston or Amos right now, and I'm waiting to see what the betting movement is. That's just kind of my thinking. But as far as needs and where you think Green Bay may go, what's your thoughts?
I got corner. I think that because they will be trading Jari Alexander. He wants to trade, and he was injured a lot anyway. When he was healthy, he was good, but the Packers kind of got by without him anyway. But that's still a position that they need to fill. I went a little bit contrarian, a little different here, and I grabbed the Notre Dame guy. I just think that Benjamin Morrison did enough last year to kind of be a Gutekunst guy. And I feel like he's kind of a safe pick, 31 tackles, 3 interceptions, 10 passes defended. He looked really good against Ohio State when he played Marvin Harrison last year and when he played Emeka Egbuka this year. So I thought that Notre Dame corner right there might have improved his draft stock, and that's where I'm knocking.
I am going wide receiver, but cornerback is my second option there. And to Kiev's point, I had Benjamin Morrison and Siobhan Ravel slotted as first rounders early in the process before the combine. I think the injuries might push them into the second round, but I think both of those guys have first round talent. So it wouldn't surprise to see Morrison go in the last 10 or so picks of round one. But I think if Tet McMillan falls to Green Bay at 23, he would be a good option here. And I could even see Matthew Golden going off the board here at 23.
Yeah, stick it to Rodgers. Pick a wide receiver the first time that for a while.
Yeah, with the draft in Green Bay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's draft in Green Bay. That is true. So Ravel was interesting to me because he has the highest ceiling, but boy, what a learning curve he's going to have to go through. He hasn't played a lot of football in high school or college, but tons of athletic talent. So that would be interesting. I have safety for Minnesota. Any thoughts?
100% for me. I mean, you know,
Thought we'd be
Emin
quick on Minnesota, huh?
yeah, Emin this feels like the pick.
Yeah.
Don't be so quick to not look at the odds here, because I think I bet it and got like 4-1. It's a safety. Let's see what it's at right now. 2-1. Okay, so it's down a little bit. But
the only caveat to that is they only have 4 picks, so they could trade, and the guy likes to trade about 3 times per year. So
That's
you have
true.
to be a little careful. But if they have the full contingent of picks, I think safety makes sense.
and maybe they still get a safety, so hopefully.
Yeah.
But you know, let's stick with that and move.
And to follow up what Kiev, to follow up what Kiev said, I bet this morning at plus 320 at FanDuel. So shop around. There still might be some decent numbers there.
Thank you for that particular tip. Houston's been somewhat mocked, I've heard, to Ibuka and a few other places, but I'm still thinking maybe Zabel falls here, maybe defensive tackle, maybe Connerly here. I'd kind of like to see them go offensive line, but I don't have a good sense as to where they're going. What about you guys?
This is my Tyler Booker pick. I agree with offensive line. It's hard to know with an interior offensive lineman exactly where to put him, but I feel like there's the need here for Houston across really the entire offensive line, and Booker just really seems like the kind of player who would appeal to them. And I have him rated, and I would say, you know, consensus board, sharp mocks, he tends to go after Zabel. So I have Booker after Zabel. I think this would be a really great landing spot for one of these interior offensive linemen.
I agree with the offensive line. I have Simmons there, and I guess maybe it's because of the connection to CJ Stroud a little bit with the Ohio State thing. But a lot of people say he could be interior as well with the shorter arms. Stroud was sacked 52 times last year, and Simmons has played both right and left tackle positions at San Diego State and Ohio State. You know, until he got injured at Oregon, he didn't allow a sack. So, you know, either way, I agree with the position.
LA Rams are next on the clock. Let you guys start. Where do they go? Because I think it's hard to get any intel. I used to live just a few miles from their headquarters. I got little to no information from them. Where do they go?
Wouldn't it be funny if Jalen Ramsey trades back to the Rams another year? I think they need a corner, and I think they should pick maybe like a Trey Amos. I'm pretty high on him. I think he's a good corner. I actually like the corners more than the market myself. But they've really stunk at that position. But I also think that they're going to go with defensive tackle and nose tackle and Derek Harmon, just because they're going to make it that much better for Jared Verse. You know, I feel like clogging the run is going to be big, and Harmon's that big size guy that would be there. Now, if he's not there, sure. This is a mock. We're up to our 26th pick here, so you know, we'll see who falls to them. But you know, a Grant or somebody too, I have no problem with that.
I have them going cornerback here, and this is my Jahdae Barron pick. But I could really see a lot of different things. It's hard to know with Sean McVay. And then I'd also say I could see wide receiver if it's Matthew Golden, because I think Golden would be a really good complement to, you know, more like the route technicians that they have in Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, whereas Golden is more of the speed guy. But, you know, at the same time, they re-signed Tutu Atwell to like a $10 million a year contract. Maybe they're not investing in wide receiver anymore. So I have cornerback here, but you know, really I could see a lot of things, but what I don't see is quarterback. I know in some mocks, you know, a week or so ago, some people were thinking, well, maybe this is a potential landing spot for Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart, but I do not see that. The Rams have been very strategic when they believe that they are in a championship window or like a competitive window where they push their chips in the table and they go all in. I don't see them investing a first rounder in a player that they intend to develop on the bench. I don't see them doing that when they have Stafford, they have Devontae Adams. They believe they are in a window to contend. So I believe it's basically anything except quarterback.
Absolutely agree with the position focus and what you just said. I think those are fantastic points.
It's still
Right
weird
now, we
watching
haven't.
Matt
Yeah,
Stafford so much. It's like, why do
yeah,
you mess around with that? And
yeah.
it's like Stafford winning your championship. Talk about trading him. I don't understand that dynamic.
That was noise, I think. I don't know. We
Maybe
haven't
so.
talked about Howie Roseman yet. The guy made 8 trades last year. I actually have the Rams and the Eagles trading just for the fun of it because somebody we have not mentioned yet is the other safety, Starks. And I think if he drops to 26 and the Rams have been known to trade back, why not the Eagles move up to 26 to get Starks? Any opinion on that?
I could see that because I think the Ravens at 27 are a prime landing spot for
Right.
Starks. So they could be moving ahead of the Ravens to get him. They have the need. I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great idea if Stark's still on the board. Yeah, but as you know, I have him to the Vikings, but I can definitely see that because my Baltimore pick, I say who they should pick is a safety. So we'll get to who I do have slotted in.
Yeah, we're Baltimore now, and to me, Baltimore just sits back and takes whoever drops in the draft. They tend to get talent, and they say, "How did he end up in Baltimore?" I mean, I've heard that just so many times because they just wait for the board to come to them. So, if they wait for the board to come to them, there may be value in other positions, but otherwise, I would personally look offensive line. What are your thoughts?
I like safety for them, and I think Xavier Watts is a very underrated safety in this draft. I actually think he's as good as the other two personally. I watched a lot of Notre Dame, and this guy just knew exactly where to be at the right time. Great ball instincts. He was punishing running backs as well. This guy was an absolute beast, and I wouldn't mind the Ravens grabbing him if the other two are off the board. But I'm assuming that they're going to go with James Pierce, who's an edge rusher, because what's funny is the Ravens, the way they conduct their defense is not so like I want a ton of skill in the backfield. I want to get to the quarterback to make the job easier on them. They are very blitz heavy schemes, and they throw a lot of different formations on defense at people and at offenses. And I just think that they kind of have that philosophy. It's like either get to the quarterback or absolutely get burned. And so that's why I think they go with the James Pierce, who I think is kind of not getting a lot of respect at like 31.5 as his number. And Pierce ran the fastest 40 for an edge at the combine at 4.47. It's cool to see people actually get the combine these days, in my opinion. I'm starting to really like give them respect, to be honest with you. 6'5", 243 pounds, could put on some weight, right? But man, that would be a great attack for the Ravens.
Yeah, I like that general perspective. And with Pierce, I mean, he was like mocked number 1 overall in some way too early mocks at this time last year, and he's got the athleticism to back it up. He's got the pedigree. That would be really interesting. I can see the Ravens going edge. I can also see them going with Tyler Booker if he falls down to them. I have this as the Malachi Starks landing spot. But if he were gone, yeah, I could see potentially Xavier Watts. But I don't know if they would go with Watts if someone like James Pierce is still on the board. So I think it's safety right now, but interior offensive lineman, if Booker's there, an edge is always an option, whether that be Pierce or whether potentially Donovan Ezuraku out of Boston College. But those would be the two edges that I think would be in contention right there for Ravens.
I'm rooting for Pierce. I have head-to-head Pierce versus Milrow, who goes first. So let's go for it. Let's get it that way. I have edge rusher going to the Lions. They had 18 sacks in the 11 games that Hutchinson missed due to injury. Hutchinson played 7 games, still was their leading sacker for the season. I don't see how they can't give him help on the other side. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I have edge going here and to the next pick to the Commanders.
Okay.
It just feels like this is sort of like a little bit of a power alley right here for the edge rushers who fall down the board a little bit. So whether it's Ezraku and Pierce, that's the way I have it stacked. Ezraku going to the Lions, Pierce going to the Commanders. But I see those two guys coming off of the board pretty quickly, like back to back or, in some fashion here. It picks 28, 29.
I have 28. I think they should go edge for Detroit, but I have them grabbing Tyler Booker from Georgia in my mock because they have to replace Kevin Ziegler. And so
Another
that's why
option. Yeah.
I feel like that's just kind of like what they're want to do first. And you know what's weird about the Lions is they just had such bad injury luck on the edge, right? So you got to trust that Hutchinson's okay. And some of their other guys. I know they just lost another one that they picked up. I think it was Smith that they lost to free agency too, which was just a borrow guy anyway, right? So you hope Aiden Hutchinson's better, but I think that they could go with edge because of that. But I did mock Booker because I like Booker a lot.
Yeah. And Washington, since we're on the topic of Washington, they need to shore up their run defense. So if it's not edge, I actually particularly thought that maybe they would go DT with Grant if he was still available at this particular point. I think they tend to take high character guys. Lions too. Dan Rivera mentioned that the Lions tend to take some high character guys that have that Lion mantra and that Lion mentality. I think Washington has changed the culture, and they're going to be looking for somebody to plug holes on the defense as well.
I think it's front seven. Go ahead, Kay.
Yeah.
No, sorry. I had Michael Williams going to the. I think he falls to Washington.
Oh, that's a real big fall.
That would be a big fall. I agree, but I had put him somewhere. And Jack Sawyer from Ohio State. He's kind of between the line guy and the linebacker size wise, and I guess he's like a late second round guy. But I feel like Jack Sawyer could be a sleeper. And I remember when T.J. Watt was fell. I mean, he was in the first round still, and how much I like T.J. Watt. I wonder if Jack Sawyer is just an NFL football player, and he's not going to be a first round guy. But I just wanted to bring him up because we're getting late in the draft.
Well, to your point kind of about tweeners, I also see this as a potential Jahad Campbell landing spot if he falls down the board because of injury concerns. Edge, I think, makes a lot of sense here. Defensive line makes sense. You kind of get a little bit of the edge dynamic with Campbell while also getting an off-ball linebacker there.
Yeah. Good point. I'd be surprised if Buffalo doesn't go defense. I've heard some wide receiver buzz. But personally, you got to shore up that defense. It's like with some of these teams, Cincinnati, Buffalo, and whatever, you've got the quarterback. Give them, a chance to not have to win games 35-31. Where do you guys see Buffalo?
Secondary. This is my Maxwell Harrison landing spot. But if Emanwari fell down the board, if Starks fell down the board, I could also see them going safety here. So pretty strong secondary lane for me.
Okay.
Agreed. I have Harrison here as well in my mock. And to be honest with you, I really like Darian Porter. I think he's going to be the sleeper. He's got the measurables that Ron and I discussed, but he doesn't have the experience that much. But a 4.30 40 and a 6'4" frame, 200 pounds at the combine, that is massive. I mean, from Iowa State here, this kid could be the sleeper of the draft if the measurables match up to the instincts, right? You're going to need to keep up with the Tyreek Hills and the fast receivers that you're going to face on the Bills, and maybe it's one of those guys because Harrison at least also had the 4.28 40, so it's like one of the speedy cornerbacks I like. And to Matthew's point, the safety could fall to them as well.
Yeah, for me. Cornerback safety, that's my number one need for Buffalo. In the back of my mind, though, I have this funny feeling that they may look defensive line instead, but I definitely think that we're looking defensively. Cleveland is a funny organization. The New York Giants, they're a funny organization. Everybody's on the hot seat. Everybody's got to do this, that, whatever. I think, even though I completely disagree with what I'm going to say, Jackson Dart is in play with Kansas City's pick. And I could see Kansas City going down either 3 spots or 4 spots, bidding war between the Giants and Cleveland. Who gets Jackson Dart and turns him into some sort of NFL quarterback in this spot? Your thoughts on Kansas City in general, and whether or not you think the Giants or Cleveland would be bold enough to go up in the first round to get a quarterback?
If Kansas City can trade down just a few spots, I think it could make sense for them to do it. They can still maybe get Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly or one of these offensive linemen. And I think that's the way that they would go if they stuck at 31. But I will say, I think there's a very good chance that we get to this point in the draft and Jackson Dart is available. Tyler Shuck is still there. Jalen Milroe is still there. What is the incentive for the Browns to trade up a few spots to make sure they get quote unquote their guy? Like, I think they might view some of these guys, I wouldn't say as interchangeable, but as maybe in the same tier. And there's just a certain pressure as a GM that you put upon yourself if you take a guy in the first round instead of just letting him come to you a few picks later at the top of the second. So I think we actually won't see the trades for the quarterbacks going up. I don't know if the NFL is as hot on these guys as maybe we would have been led to believe by reporting of these teams are looking to move up into the bottom of the first round. It's hard to move up into the bottom of the first round. Like, you have to give up capital that you don't really want to give up, and you might not really need to do it. And I think this is 2022. Like, I think this is just a bad quarterback class that no GM really wants to be too invested in. So I'm a little bit skeptical. Again, I was skeptical last year on the quarterbacks and I got killed for it. So, but it feels like a very different class. Kiev, what are your thoughts on what happens here with teams potentially trading up?
I think it'd be so smart for the Chiefs to do it personally. But you're right. You do it for a 5th-year option, so that way you can have that and have the option. Now, I always say it's like, well, my quarterback's any good. You're going to pay him by year 4 anyway, or maybe he'll sit out and force you out to it. It's like, are you drafting a quarterback to like really need to do a 5th-year option? So I've heard both in that. I kind of feel like, no, you don't do that. I think the Kansas City Chiefs clearly need a tackle or somebody to stop any offensive lineman after what we saw in the Super Bowl. Just get manhandled, right? And they've kind of screwed around a little bit, F around and find out type situation with some of their offensive tackles, letting them walk before, and they just let their guard walk right to the Bears. So I think that they go offensive line. I like Gray Zabel the most, just because he's so versatile. But I think Ariante Ursary would be a good fit for them as he visited the team, and he's from Minnesota. But they can probably grab him if they've traded a few picks down, if the theory on 5th-year options and everything is correct. But holy cow, that blow up a few things in the draft if that pick goes, because that means the offensive linemen probably go under the total, which I kind of like the over 6.5. It would also mean the quarterbacks go over 2.5 if Sanders lands somewhere. And that would blow some stuff up at the end. But I wish there was a prop that Kansas City Chiefs do trade. I just like to see the number on it.
That'd be interesting. One more thing about the possibility of teams trading up for these quarterbacks, and this is just sort of reading tea leaves, but it seems like out of the 3 guys who might fall, Dart, Milroe, and Shuck, it seems like the Browns are on Shuck, the Saints are on Dart, and the Giants are on Milroe. Like, they might not even need to trade up to get the guy that they would want to have. So that, again, just goes to the question of incentive.
Yeah, I'm not saying there should be 3 quarterbacks in the first round. Shuck, I have as a 4th-round option. I don't particularly like his game at all, and there are a few reasons why. Milroe, I have in the 3rd round. Dart, I have in the 2nd round. But you're talking about Cleveland and the Giants in a bidding war. And I actually agree with which team likes which player. I think those are the best fits. So It'll be interesting to see what happens. We have one more team. We have Philadelphia, even though I had them moving up. Let's say they actually do stay, which would be a real long shot in Howie Roseman's tenure at 32. Where do you have them going?
Best player available, whoever falls.
Yeah.
I
Good luck
have,
filling out your mock at the end is what you're saying.
yeah, I have it as Walter Nolan right now, because that just feels like a very Eagles thing for them to get maybe the best defensive tackle in the class at number 32, where other teams just didn't take him because they were worried about, whatever concerns.
Yeah.
But, James Pierce could be an option if he falls down the board. One of the safeties, whether it's Starks or Eminwari, whoever it is who's good and just fell, because of the stupidity of the league, that I think is who they take there. And they're in the fortunate position of being so strong that they can really go true best player available, really any position, and it would be fine. I could even see Emeka Egbuka, because they're not strong in the slot. They really could use a number 3 wide receiver. Egbuka is right on that round 1, round 2 borderline. So that could also be an option.
Good point.
I mean, I would go with when you're blessed with all these riches, you just go with the best player available. So I agree. I mock picked TJ Sanders, defensive tackle from South Carolina. I mean, they lost Milton Williams, and that's the only reason. Not that they, aren't stacked as it is. They lost Sweat though as well. And isn't Brandon Graham unsigned? I wonder, is he going to get signed and brought back for a year? Does he care to play another year now that he won the Super Bowl? I don't know much about Brandon Graham. I got to research that more. But those are 3 guys that are potentially all gone. Definitely 2 of them are gone. So defensive tackle would be a no-brainer to me. TJ Sanders had 4 sacks and 51 tackles last year, and he's a very good interior pass rush ability, kind of like Carter is. So that'd be fun.
75%, I say they trade. 50%, whoever they pick is from the SEC. We'll see how that turns out. Gentlemen, I mean, this has been a great exercise and really good thought process going in on this. One final comment from you on the first round. Do you think we end up with predictability or utter chaos or somewhere in between?
I think that, and this is why I'm attacking this draft more from a positional draft standpoint, just like we went over, really, from a where players are going to fall. I think it's just a different philosophy when there's so much uncertainty. It makes the teams the best player available. There's not much of a difference between the 3rd guy and the 45th guy, right? It's like, how do you know what's best available? Then, well, in that case, you go for what you need. So I think that teams will go for need, and that's how I'm attacking this draft. Because of the quarterback position, the draft is looked at as not strong, and we could be blown away in 2 years, Matthew. We could be like, holy cow, we were so wrong. This draft was really good. So it's going to be fun to see. It's just as exciting to me as the other ones, to be honest with you. So it's going to be fun to see, and I think that there's not going to be as much chaos, to answer your question.
It's I think well put by Kiev. I think that I think Ashton Genty, he will be, for me, the really intriguing point in the top 10 picks. Where he ends up going, I think will have a really big cascading impact on the next 4 or 5 picks after that. Shedeur Sanders, where he ends up going, that is a really big piece. And if he falls all the way out of round 1, I have I think a pretty big fade on the quarterbacks in this class. And so I will be very curious to see what happens at the end of round 1, if there are some teams trading up. I think there are some really intriguing players in this class, especially the slew of running backs on day 2. I think a number of those guys could end up having really strong NFL careers. And then, some of these edge rushers, I think it's a pretty strong defensive line class. And so maybe, the positions that are kind of sexy, it's not a great class, but in the end, it could still end up being a class that has a lot of NFL contributors at a high level for a long time. And so that could be really intriguing. And just seeing where all these guys go, it'll be really fun to watch.
Yeah, we covered round one, and I think we did a really thorough job. But for these teams, the draft is not about round one. The draft is about its entirety. And when I say Denver may not look a running back in round one, but they're going to look in round two or whatever, because they're slotting their board. They need to come away, like every team needs to come away with not just one starter, but a whole bunch of guys who are going to be eventual starters, fill some holes, succession planning for guys on expiring contracts. Day two is going to be actually the most fascinating to me, because I think that's where the strength of this draft is. A lot of the guys Kiev mentioned, the cornerbacks, they're all going to go in round two. Some of these other guys are going to go in round two for other positions, running back, for example. So I think this draft, and I'm going to come back and recap it probably in 2 or 3 weeks. And then we'll talk about what teams did right and what Atlanta did instead of going edge rusher or whatever the story that happens. But gentlemen, I thank you so much for spending your time with me here on this particular podcast. Please follow Kiev in terms of all the content that he puts out. Matthew's going to be busy, I know, later today with some more draft content, and then after the draft and matching it up with fantasy. Guys, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ron.
I'll be back next week with a more traditional show, probably with a beer in hand because of my guest. Talk to you next week. See you later.